Ladies and gentlemen, penis fencing doesn't only have to be for bonobos. I love John Donaghue! Woo! Come on up here and ring, John! Everybody clap, you bastards! Clap!
All right.
Look, John, I made you a Smith chart.
Well, you did.
I'm the educated.
It's a hard intro to follow. This is what a Smith chart is. Okay, how's that? 5 poems. 2 from here, 3 from here. It's always good in a poetry reading to know what you're up against.
Books.
This is called, this is my first book called Precipice. He's asking me why I've injured my stomach, why my face is scarred. He wants everything back. Swollen feet, arthritic elbows. I've lost some teeth, I joke, but he doesn't look up. A bare room, a desk, 2 chairs. A suicide, he asks? I don't like suicides. What's the difference, I joke. And then he does look up. His eyes are slate blue. The difference, he says, but then a bell rings and rings, and he writes careless on his pad. That poem is called The Goods, and I wrote it out of a thought I had one day about my wrist. I was looking at my wrist and I realized this is my wrist. I own this wrist. I can do whatever I want with this wrist, but I have absolutely no idea. I don't own the design of the wrist, and I have no idea how it works. I have no idea how things in my body that I feel I own work. And somehow that thought led to that poem. I thought maybe someday I have to give all that back. And the other poem from this book is called Revision. I have some issues with Mother Nature. I think we all have some issues with Mother Nature. And this poem is written out of that energy. Revision. In Rwanda, she gave her victims a choice. By the bullet I will soon put through your head, or be hacked to death. And here in this river, she doesn't raise that blue heron from the shallows. She is the rising heron, as she is the mother of napalm, destroyer of the ozone, as she is my eyes that see this glass light lapping at her feet. I have come to search the bottom for things magical, and I have a pail full. But I am sick to death of praising her, and sick of her illusions, language, consciousness. Look at me, she says, and see yourself as separate and responsible. I'll make your body. You drop the bomb. Then act as if you came from someone else. See that desert's beauty? I dried a sea for it. Thank you. You know, there are some really great examples of exploration in history, but perhaps none more spectacular than humanity putting a person onto the moon. And you know, in the past, in those old days, when explorers went out, they would carry with them what were called articles of exploration or articles of agreement. And they were agreements between themselves and their sponsors. And they gave the explorer, at least in the explorer's eyes, a certain legitimacy or authority. So the explorer would arrive somewhere and stand on a rock and say something important. Well, so too with Neil Armstrong when he stepped onto the moon. The difference between Neil Armstrong and somebody like Christopher Columbus, you know, Columbus had maybe 50 people standing around him when he said something. But when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, the whole world was hushed and leaning in, listening to what he said. And I'll leave it up to you whether you think what Neil Armstrong said when he stepped onto the moon made sense or whether it didn't. This is called, if I can find it, here, Articles of Exploration. And there's a line in here, a bit of bad luck. This line reads, "He'll never know. Who was Deep Throat? Did Oswald act alone?" And when I wrote that line, I picked two things I thought we would never know. But unfortunately, that didn't work. But the line is here, so I'll read the line. It's Articles of Exploration, and there's an epigraph. And the epigraph reads, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Neil Armstrong as he stepped onto the moon." He sing-songed it to himself as he studied the maps of the Sea of Tranquility. He spoke it out loud in the shower. That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. But up there on the moon, he blew it. He got so caught up with getting down the ladder safely, he left out the rotten little "uh." We knew what he meant, and he knew we knew it. But he would have slapped his forehead if he could have, and there was no going back up the ladder. It's said he avoids interviews, doesn't attend celebrations or go to reunions. Maybe in the midst of all that perfection, something in him meant to screw it up. He'll never know. Who was Deep Throat? Did Oswald act alone? Years later, when the first Viking landed on Mars, nothing was said. The camera turned on, a door opened, and the machine went to work. We could have given it speech. We could have had it say flawlessly, "That's one small step for a machine, one giant leap for machine kind." But words weighing too much and with no human to say them just aren't worth it. You know, my day job is teaching engineering. And
a noble pursuit.
A noble pursuit. And I worked in industry before I started teaching at CSU. And
also a noble pursuit.
Another noble pursuit. And if you design a product, you know, there are a series of design meetings, and finally you build a prototype. And you put that prototype out in the field and you run tests on it. And then there's a really big, serious design meeting where you use the results of the field testing of the prototype, and you really look hard at what you've done. And it occurred to me one day, this world we live in, how would that design review meeting go for that designer? And the title of this poem is "In the Design Review Meeting," he said, and it's the first line of the poem. In the design review meeting, he said, "Okay, it isn't perfect. In fact, I'll admit it's a bit fucked up here and there, okay? Maybe more than just a bit, maybe more than just here and there. Setting off a bang like that? Definitely not my best. But look, we're stuck with it, committed. And hey, time works. I like time. And physics, chemistry, the dynamics of it all, good, huh? And photosynthesis, not bad. Water, rain, the clouds, the sky in general, day and night, rising moons, all that I foresaw. That's mine. And color, the senses, compassion, sex. Sex is good, right? They love sex. Okay, perfect, not so perfect. And yeah, death's a problem. And all the killing, maiming, eating, all the just plain dying. Blindsided, never saw it coming. And their brains, well, far below the radar. Problems, I missed them. So, okay, what do you want to do? Crucify me? Funny. Stop production? Close our doors? It works. They won't sue. They don't want to sue. They blame themselves. Yeah, I know. You want me out of here. But I'll be fine. It will finally blow. And there's nothing in this model that connects designer to design. You know, this last poem needs a little bit of introduction. I wasn't sure I was going to read it tonight, and then I came in and I saw this fabulous photograph here. It's a photograph, well, and we're right now on there, up in that upper left corner, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the steel mill, or the steel making area. And this poem is called Lackawanna, and it grew out of a photograph I saw somewhere in the 80s in Time magazine, and they were, excuse me, dynamiting the blast furnaces in Youngstown. They caught the furnaces coming down. You know, blast furnaces, they used to make pig iron, which then is used to make steel. And it seemed to me that that photograph captured the end of a trajectory that maybe started after World War II, when American power was perhaps at its peak and America was, you know, rising in the world. And there was no symbol greater than American might than steel, U.S. steel. And here we were 40 years later, and they were blasting, dynamiting the blast furnaces. And it was sort of like that U.S. steel and coming to there. And so out of that, thinking about that, I wrote this poem. And you have to know a little bit about a hot strip mill. And there's a hot strip mill on that photograph. In a hot strip mill, you take billets of steel, which are 6 inches thick, 3 feet wide, 20 feet long, and you take bunches of them and you heat them up in a furnace, and then you push them out into a series of rolling stands, and they're brought down to the thickness of steel that's used in the manufacture of automobiles or refrigerators. And you see, well, and as they're brought down, the billet doesn't get wider, it just gets longer. So by the time it comes out the finishing stands, it's going at about 30 miles an hour, and it goes into a coiler. And you see these coils of steel on flatbed trucks on the highway. The process is controlled by operators who sit up above the line, in what's called a control pulpit. And if these billets are fantastic. Sometimes they'll just stand up on end in the middle of the rolling process and vibrate, and the vibration sounds like a scream. And sometimes they get off center and the whole thing gets destroyed, and then they say the billet has been cobbled. So thank God this is a 2-page poem. After an introduction like that. And there's a lot of imagery in here from when I was young, which was in the 40s. It's called Lackawanna. Lackawanna is a steel-making area outside of Buffalo, and somebody told me in some Native American dialect, Lackawanna means river of blood. And it looks like it. When these billets come out, they're glowing red hot. It looks like a river of blood that's rolling around. The last billet to be rolled in America is in the furnace, and Dick Tracy is standing by. The world has been made safe for democracy, And the world is better off for LaGuardia having read the funnies to the kids over the radio. Tracy is standing by with memories of a Foxtrot America 2x2 and the GIs triumphantly home because it was we who had won the war. As the billet is pushed from the furnace, Tracy mounts the control pulpit. In the glowing heat, he can once again see the dietary pie charts of America, the dairy and grain, the fresh meat and vegetables. He can smell the Java and the ham and the eggs and the once-over easy because he is going to roll the last billet to be rolled in America. Tracy knows he must shape a tongue to lick the immigrants' dust from the mill floor, a tongue to guide the liquid steel from the open throats of the blacks, to thrill at the salt in the blood, a steel tongue for a steel rage, a ribbon of steel to lick wounds. Tracy's eyes glow red. They send red down through his arms, red into red hands to grip steel. But in the first pass in the roughing stand, the billet misforms, and Tracy hears the crystallized scream of the earth. Crushed, sintered, flowing and held down for the white-hot obscenity of steel breaking steel. Tess is gone. B.O. Plenty is gone. The blast furnaces are now rubble at his feet, and Tracy is now wild in the pulpit. He is beginning to sob, and the teardrops and sweat leap comic strip style from his squared-off face. He is calling on his little obsolete wrist radio for an understanding of the birthing of a tongue. He is calling Kennedy and King. He is calling up the old neighborhoods. He is calling Iwo Jima. He is calling up every word that has ever screeched from his radio's little speaker. Outside the mill, the people are standing in lines. From the screens of their radio videos, the image of Tracy rides to their eyes. Tracy's not selling steel. He's not selling games, and he sure as hell is not selling jobs. The billet is cobbled in the finishing stands, and Tracy is slumped in the pulpit. Dick Tracy, we lift you in hands bruised in the mill, touch you to our wounds. Tracy in hard hat and Mackinaw eased back to his comic strip page. Tracy at 50, just fiction, and standing in line. Braddock, Lackawanna, Youngstown, Aliquippa, Lorain, Iron Mountain, Birmingham, Cleveland, Bucks County, Gadsden, Provo, Hibbing, Johnstown, Bethlehem, Pittsburgh, Wheeling, Portage, Brackenridge, Duluth, Ashland. Thank you.
Yeah, there are several people who want one I've talked to already.
You can get it at most shitty bookstores, right?
Shitty.
The shitty ones.
The shitty bookstore.
Yeah.
There are no shitty bookstores.
Do you have names of any of these shitty bookstores?
My lawyer didn't want me to talk about it today.
All bookstores are not shitty.
Except
The bookstore is the last vestige of bookstore that we have left in this bookstore. New pimp. Steve is a pimp.
I need a big...
Lady, give it up for John Donaghue. Give it up! Come on! I have to admit that I feel really shitty that I'm making my confession to you that I didn't get to hear much of what he was reading. But I did hear people say, this reminds me of good, things I've read of Jim Carroll's or heard him read. And I heard, I really want to buy this guy's book. So